She was invisible. Until he wasn't. One look. That's all it took for the most feared man in the city to stop breathing. She was crying without crying, holding a clipboard like a shield, while 400 people laughed at a joke she was the punchline of. He didn't know her name. He didn't need to. Something ancient cracked open behind his ribs, and when he stood up, the entire room felt it before they saw it. Power doesn't make noise. It just arrives. So did he. Welcome to Loose Stories. Now buckle up. Quick pause. If you're already feeling this story, tap that like button right now and drop a comment. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, let's go. The Whitmore Ellis wedding was the kind of event that required a guest list, a dress code, and apparently, a ranking system. Success had known this going in. She had coordinated enough elite weddings in Atlanta's social circles to understand that some rooms were built to remind certain people of their place. She'd worn her black coordinator's blazer-like armor, kept her natural hair pinned up in a neat bun, and carried her clipboard the way a soldier carries a weapon. Not because she wanted to fight, but because she was prepared to survive. She had not, however, prepared for Damien. Damien Ellis, her ex of 3 years, stood at the altar looking like he'd been designed by committee to break someone's heart efficiently. Tall, well-dressed, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. He hadn't looked at her once since she arrived. Not when she directed the florists. Not when she reorganized the seating chart his mother had destroyed at the last minute. Not even when she walked past him to fix the broken lapel mic on the minister's collar. He had simply ceased to register her existence. Which was fine. That was fine. She told herself that approximately 11 times before the reception started. The ballroom at the Whitmore estate was a cathedral of old money. Vaulted ceilings, crystal, chandeliers, white roses drowning every surface. Success moved through it like water, quiet and purposeful, solving problems before anyone noticed they existed. She was refilling the escort card table when she first heard the laughter. It came from a cluster of women near the champagne tower. Damien's new bride, Camille, holding court in $4,000 worth of Vera Wang, surrounded by friends who laughed on cue like a laugh track. Camille had the particular beauty of a woman who had never once been told no, and she deployed it like a weapon. "I heard she used to date Damien," one of the women whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Her?" Camille's voice carried the gentle devastation of a person who doesn't need to raise it. "Oh, darling, some women are just background characters in other people's love stories. You almost feel sorry for them." She paused. Almost. The laughter that followed was low, practiced, perfect. Success did not look up from the escort cards. She sorted them by table number. Her hands were steady, her jaw was tight, and her eyes, dark, deep, and unflinching, stayed absolutely dry. She would not give them a single tear. Not one. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that at table 1, the most exclusive seat in the room, a man had been watching her for the last 40 minutes. Not Camille, not Damien, not the laughing women. Her. Choi Tae-yoon didn't attend weddings. He had been invited to this one because Marcus Whitmore owed him a debt that couldn't be repaid in cash, and attending his daughter's wedding was the socially acceptable currency Marcus had offered. Tae-yoon had accepted because he needed to be seen in a setting that had nothing to do with the underground empire. He ran with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a glacier. He sat at his table the way he sat everywhere, perfectly still, perfectly composed, radiating the kind of quiet that made people instinctively lower, their voices around him. His suit was Italian, charcoal gray, buttoned without a wrinkle. His hands rested on the table. His dark eyes were steady. He was not a man who felt things impulsively. He had trained that out of himself at 17, when impulse had gotten 2 people he loved killed. Since then, Everything he did was calculated. Everything he wanted, he evaluated first. He took nothing and no one at face value. And he did not, under any circumstances, allow something as unpredictable as emotion to drive a decision. And yet, he had noticed her the moment she walked in, not because she was loud, not because she demanded it, but because she moved through chaos with a stillness that matched his own. And in a room full of people performing happiness, she was the only one who looked real. He had watched her fix 12 things in 40 minutes without being thanked for a single one. He had watched the bride's eyes slide over her like she was furniture. He had watched Damien, Ellis, whose name Tae-yoon now associated with a particular brand of stupidity, not look at her once. And then he had watched the laughter. He had seen her hands still on the escort cards, had seen the slight tightening of her jaw, had seen the way she lifted her chin by exactly 2 degrees, not in arrogance, but in the specific way a person lifts their chin when they are refusing to drown. Something happened in his chest that he didn't have a word for. He stood up. His head of security, stationed near the wall, clocked the movement immediately and took half a step forward. Tae-yoon silenced him with a look. The walk across the ballroom took perhaps 15 seconds. He was aware of the way people parted. He was always aware of that, the way a room reorganized itself around him, instinctive and involuntary, the way water moves around a stone. He didn't think about it. He walked toward her. He stopped beside her at the escort card table. She looked up, and for one unguarded second, just one, something moved across her face. Not recognition, not fear. Something older than both. Her eyes were the color of deep water, and they searched his face the way a person searches for solid ground. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned to face the room. Camille had gone quiet. Her friends had gone quiet. The laughter had evaporated, because Choi Tae-yoon was standing at the escort card table, and nobody in that room with any sense of self-preservation could explain why. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud. Didn't need to be. "Excuse me." He let the silence that followed do its work. Then, "You're speaking about my wife." The ballroom didn't gasp. It simply stopped, like someone had pressed a button that paused every heartbeat in the room simultaneously. Camille's champagne glass hovered halfway to her mouth. Damien Ellis went the color of old paper. Success turned to look at him so fast she nearly dropped her clipboard. Her lips parted. Her eyes, those deep, steady eyes, went wide for the first time all evening. He didn't look at her. He looked at Camille, at the women, at every laughing face that had just realized, with cold and dawning terror, exactly whose wife they had been mocking. "My apologies," Tae-yoon said, with the specific courtesy that lands like a threat, "for the interruption. Please, continue enjoying the evening." He said it the way a man says it when he means the opposite. Nobody continued anything. The cluster of women dissolved like sugar in rain. Only then did he turn to look at her. She was staring at him. Her clipboard was pressed against her chest like a life raft. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were sharp, and underneath all of it, underneath the composure and the professionalism and the 2-degree chin lift, she was shaking. Just slightly. Just enough for him to see. She started. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly. "I absolutely have things to say," she replied. His mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. "I know." She stared at him for another 3 seconds. Then she said, very carefully, "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "But you will." His name came to her 3 hours later, via Google, in the back of a cab going home. She had typed, "Korean man, wedding, Atlanta, Whitmore Estate, gray suit, terrifying." The results had been immediate, plentiful, and deeply alarming. Choi Tae-yoon, 34. Publicly, founder and chairman of CY Global Holdings, a private equity firm with assets in 12 countries. Privately, and here the internet got careful and vague in the specific way it got careful and vague about men who made lawyers nervous. He was described in whispered circles as the architect of the most sophisticated criminal network operating in the American Southeast. Korean-born, Atlanta-based for 6 years, connected to 3 federal investigations, charged with nothing, because he was the kind of man who understood the difference between proximity and evidence. Success put her phone down. Then she picked it up again and read the same paragraph 4 more times. She had, apparently, been claimed in front of 400 people by a man who ran a mafia. Perfect. That was just absolutely perfect. She went home to her apartment. 3rd floor walk-up, good bones, 2 plants she kept alive by sheer stubbornness, and did not sleep. She made tea. She sat on her couch. She replayed the moment in the ballroom approximately 40 times, analyzing every variable, trying to locate the angle. Because there was an angle. There was always an angle with men like that. Nobody walked across a ballroom for a woman they didn't know without wanting something in return. By morning, she had a theory. Mistaken identity. He'd meant to claim someone else and gotten the wrong woman. By 9 a.m., that theory collapsed. Because a bumper, black car, matte, enormous, with plates she couldn't trace, was parked outside her building, and a man in a dark suit knocked on her door and handed her a card with a single number printed on it. No name. Just, call it. She called it. He answered on the 2nd ring. "You found out who I am," he said. Not a question. "You knew I would," she said. A pause. Then, "I'd like to explain in person." "You'd like to explain," she repeated, "why you told an entire wedding reception that I was your wife?" "Yes." "In person?" "Yes." She should have said no. Every logical, self-preserving instinct she owned told her to say no, delete the number, and move to a different city. She said, "You have 1 hour." He arrived in 40 minutes. He was, if anything, more unsettling in the daylight. He wore a simpler suit, still perfect, still expensive, still somehow alarming. And he sat across from her in her small living room like a man completely unbothered by the fact that he was in a 3rd-floor walk-up with a succulent named Gerald on the windowsill. He told her the truth. She respected that, even as it frightened her. His enemies had become creative. 3 attempts on his life in 2 months. Federal investigators watching his business movements. The cleanest cover he could construct, one that would redirect both, was a wife, an American woman, someone warm and real and unconnected to his world. Someone who would make him look like a man building a life rather than a man running an empire. He needed a contract. 6 months. She would appear at select public events as his wife. She would have access to a private residence, a full security detail, a monthly allowance that made her breath catch when he named it, and when the 6 months ended, a clean, quiet dissolution. No strings, no danger, and a sum of money that would let her start her own events, firm debt-free. In return, she would ask no questions he didn't want to answer. Success looked at him for a long time, at the careful stillness of him, at the hands resting on his knees, at the dark eyes that gave nothing away, and somehow still felt, beneath all of it, like they were giving her something. "Why me specifically?" she asked. "Because," he said, "you stood in a room full of people who treated you like you were nothing, and you didn't break. You just held." He paused. "I need someone who holds." She should have still said no. She said, "I have conditions." His eyes shifted. Something that might have been approval moved through them. "Tell me." 3 days later, she moved into the penthouse. It was not what she expected. She had expected cold, marble and glass, and the aesthetic of a man who had evacuated his humanity for efficiency. Instead, it was warm in the specific way of spaces that have been curated by someone with taste and a complicated relationship with comfort. There were books, real ones, worn ones, with cracked spines. There was a kitchen with actual groceries in it. There was a balcony that looked out over the city like the city had been arranged for viewing. She had her own wing, her own entrance, a security detail she didn't ask for and couldn't shake. And Tae-yoon, who was present in the apartment roughly 40% of the time, at hours that suggested a schedule entirely governed by his own logic, was, at all times, precisely and deliberately respectful. He did not push. He did not hover. He showed up for the 3 public appearances they'd scheduled in the first month, stood beside her in a way that made photographers lose their professionalism entirely, introduced her to people who looked at her with the wide eyes of people recalibrating everything they thought they knew about Choi Tae-yoon, and then drove her home in silence that was, somehow, not uncomfortable. She started to find this more alarming than the contract. A man could be dangerous and obvious about it. That was manageable. This was something else. A man who was dangerous and gentle simultaneously, who left coffee outside her door in the mornings because he'd noticed she was up early, who once paused a phone call that was clearly important to pick up a bracelet she'd dropped in the hallway and hand it back to her without a word. He was dismantling her defenses one small, quiet act at a time, and she wasn't sure he was even doing it on purpose. The first real fracture came in week 5. Quick pause. If this story has you hooked, tap like and drop your thoughts below. Now, back to the story. His name was Brandon. He worked for a charity partner at one of the galas they attended, and he was handsome in an uncomplicated way. Warm smile, open face, the kind of man who made conversation feel easy. He talked to Success for 20 minutes near the bar, while Tae-yoon was across the room being briefed by his security chief. He made her laugh twice. He asked for her number with a sincerity that was almost disarming. She was explaining, carefully, without revealing anything, that she was unavailable when she felt it. Not a sound, not a touch, just a shift in the air, the specific atmospheric change of a room adjusting around a presence. Tae-yoon stood 3 feet away. He had materialized without sound or warning, and he stood there holding 2 glasses of champagne with the particular stillness of a man exercising extraordinary self-control. His eyes moved from Brandon to Success with an expression that was, technically, neutral. Every person in a 20-foot radius had registered his arrival and taken a half-step backward. Brandon registered it too. He looked at Tae-yoon. He looked at Success. He said, I'll have a good evening, and evaporated. Tae-yoon handed her one of the champagne glasses. I was handling it, she said. I know, he said. His voice was even, controlled. You're capable of handling everything, I'm aware. Then why? I wanted champagne, he said. This seemed like the right moment to bring it. She looked at him. The jaw was too tight. The eyes were not quite neutral. They were performing neutral over something that wasn't. She had learned to read him in the small space between what he showed and what he felt. And what she read right now made her heart do something inconvenient. He was just being friendly, she said. I know, Tae-yoon said again. You're jealous, she said. He looked at her, a long, steady, unreadable look. Then, we should get back to the table. But she'd seen it, and once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. Something was shifting between them, and had been shifting for weeks, slow and inevitable as a tide, and she had been pretending not to feel it, because feeling it required her to admit that a 6-month contract had already become something her heart wasn't prepared to walk away from in month 6. Later that night, back at the penthouse, she sat on the balcony with her knees pulled up and the city spread out below her like a promise, and she let herself ask the question she'd been refusing to ask. "What are you doing, Success?" The sliding door behind her opened. Tae-yoon stepped out with 2 mugs. Tea, the way she liked it, which meant he'd been paying attention longer than she'd realized. He set one down beside her without speaking and stood at the railing, looking out. They sat in silence for a long time. It was the most honest thing that had happened between them yet. "I don't know how to do this," she said eventually, quietly enough that the city wouldn't hear it. He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. She could tell he knew by the way his hands tightened slightly on his mug. "Neither do I," he said, "but I'm learning." She looked at him then, and he turned to look at her. And whatever had been building for 5 weeks arrived all at once, and neither of them ran from it. He reached out and tucked one loose curl behind her ear. Slowly, carefully, like she was something he was afraid to damage. "Don't pull away," he said, very quietly. "Not from me." Her breath came out uneven. "Tae-yoon, I know what I said in the contract," he said. "I know the terms. But I'm telling you, what I want is different from what I said." She held his gaze. The city hummed below them. And then, very slowly, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. It was not nothing. It was, in fact, the beginning of everything. The twist came on a Tuesday. She was in the penthouse office. She'd claimed a corner of it in week 3, set up her laptop and her planning files, and Tae-yoon had not said a word, just had a second monitor delivered the next morning without explanation, when 2 of his men came through the door with the specific body language of people carrying bad news in their posture. She watched Tae-yoon's face change. Not much, a fraction. But she'd learned to read him in fractions. When they left, he didn't come to her immediately. He stood at the window for a long time with his back to the room, and she knew without asking that whatever had just walked through the door was serious. "Tell me," she said. He turned, looked at her for a moment, then said, "Someone from my past is using you to get to me." Her stomach dropped. "How?" "They've identified you as my weak point." His voice was measured, but beneath it, beneath all of it, was something raw. "They took photographs from the gala last month. They know you're not. They know the arrangement started as a contract." He stopped. "They're going to try to use you, either to draw me out or to humiliate you publicly and destabilize the cover story." She absorbed this. "So the cover story is already compromised," she said. "Yes. Which means the contract is." "The contract," he said very quietly, "was over for me 3 weeks ago. I just hadn't said it yet." The room was very still. She looked at him across the space. This man who had walked into the worst night of her year and remade it into something she still couldn't fully name. Who made her coffee and brought tea and stood between her and every room that tried to diminish her. Who looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a world that kept shifting under his feet. She'd been waiting for him to pull back, for the arrangement to calcify into business, for the careful, correct distance to reassert itself. It hadn't. "Tae-yoon," she started. "You should leave," he said. Not coldly. Worse than coldly. Carefully, like he was protecting her from a decision she'd regret. "The security risk is real. If you go back to your apartment tonight, quietly, I can manage the narrative." "Stop." She stood up from the desk. "Stop managing me." He went still. "I'm not a variable in your risk calculation," she said. "I haven't been for a while, and I think you know that." She crossed the room until she was close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the carefully maintained composure that was fraying at the edges, the dark eyes that were not, by any stretch of honesty, neutral. "You want me to leave so you can feel like you protected me, but you don't get to decide that for me." He was looking at her the way he had the first night on the balcony, like she was something that surprised him down to the foundation. "You understand what my life is," he said, what staying means. I understand what leaving means, she said, and I'm not doing it. He reached for her then, one hand raised, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with the focused tenderness of a man who had not been gentle with anything in years except this one person in this one space. Success, he said. Just her name, just like that. She leaned into his hand. What followed was quiet and certain, and theirs, and it belonged to no one else. The threat materialized 3 days later. She was leaving her old apartment. She'd gone back to retrieve the last of her things, against the explicit recommendation of his security detail, because she was a woman who made her own choices, when they grabbed her. 2 men. A black van. Professional. Efficient. Terrifying. She had 6 seconds between the moment she realized what was happening and the moment the door closed, and she used them well. She dropped her phone screen up on the sidewalk, activated the tracking app Tae-yoon had installed in week 1, and memorized the street. Then the door closed, and she sat in the dark, and she was afraid, genuinely, viscerally afraid. But she was also steady. She had been steady in harder rooms than this. She thought about the way he'd said her name. She thought, he will come. Tae-yoon's phone lit up at 4:47 p.m. The tracking signal. Her location. Moving. What happened in the next 4 hours was not something that appeared in any newspaper, any police report, or any publicly accessible record. It was the kind of event that happened in the negative space of the city, the part that existed beneath the official version of things, governed by its own rules, its own consequences, its own swift and absolute justice. What mattered was this. He came. He did not send people and wait. He came. When the warehouse door opened, and she saw him, saw the precise fury barely contained behind the composure, saw the way his eyes found her across the room, and something in his whole body unlocked at the sight of her, she understood something that no contract had ever been able to capture. This was not a man who had claimed her for strategy. This was a man who would burn things down to get her back. Later. Much later. In the car, heading back to the penthouse, she sat in the back seat beside him and shook, not from fear now, but from the release of it, the letting go of all the steadiness she'd maintained for 4 hours alone in the dark. He put his arm around her without speaking. She pressed her face against his shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a long time. I was steady, she said eventually, quietly against the fabric of his jacket. I know, he said. His voice was rough in a way she'd never heard from him. You're always steady. A pause. That doesn't mean I wasn't terrified. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. I don't want 6 months, he said. I don't want a contract. I don't want a narrative or a cover story, or any of the things I told you this was. His jaw was tight. His eyes were as unguarded as she had ever seen them, stripped of the control, the composure, the careful neutrality. I want you. Specifically. Completely. With full awareness of what my life is, and full intention to build something with you that belongs to neither of us alone. He paused. I know that's not what you signed up for. Tae-yoon, she said softly. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. But I want to. She sat up. She looked at him straight on, the way she looked at every hard thing without flinching. I want you too, terrifyingly, despite extremely good judgment. His mouth curved. The real version, not the almost smile from the wedding night, but something full and rare and completely unguarded. He reached into his jacket pocket. She stopped breathing. It was not a ring. Not yet. It was a key. Simple, silver, ordinary looking. He held it out to her on his palm. To the penthouse, he said. Your copy. Not the guest key. Mine. My actual key. He looked at her steadily. I want you to come home to it. She looked at the key for a long moment. Then she picked it up. And for the first time since the worst night of her professional year, since the ballroom and the laughter and the moment a powerful, unfathomable man had walked across a room and changed the entire shape of her life, Success smiled. Fully, freely, without performing it for anyone. He watched her do it like it was the most significant thing he had ever witnessed. 6 months later, the original contract term, which they had both long since stopped counting, she stood in a small, private ceremony in the penthouse, with the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows and a handful of the people they trusted most, and she married Choi Tae-yoon. Not for cover, not for strategy, not for protection, or money, or revenge against a room full of people who had called her a background character. She married him because she had chosen him, because he had chosen her, because some things, once they are real, refuse to be anything less. Damian Ellis saw the photograph. There was only one, taken by a friend, shared privately, and recognized her. And whatever he felt about it moved through him quietly and alone, unwitnessed by anyone, because that was the nature of things you only understand after it's too late. Camille said nothing. She had been saying nothing since the ballroom. That particular silence had weight. 11 months after the wedding, on a morning when the Atlanta skyline was going gold outside their window, Success found the small white box in the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the result for a long time. Then she went to find him. He was in the kitchen making coffee, because he always made coffee in the morning, because he had been paying attention to her since the night they met. He turned when she came in, registered her face immediately, set down the mug, and crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. She held out the test without speaking. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. And every wall this man had ever built, every carefully constructed layer of control and composure and calculated distance, came down in one long, exhaled breath that held his whole world in it. "Yeah?" he said. His voice was barely sound. "Yeah," she said. He pulled her in, arms around her, face pressed to the top of her head. And he held her with the specific grip of a man who has learned, at great cost, exactly what it means to have something worth keeping. She had walked into a ballroom as a background character. She had walked out as the beginning of his entire story. And somewhere, in the particular justice of things that happen quietly, and certainly and without fanfare, that felt exactly right. You made it to the end, and that means you're truly part of the LUE Stories community. Thank you for your support. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be replying as always. And stay subscribed, because the next story is already waiting for you.